Okay, so you got your clutch cover off. Your battery negative cable is disconnected. Never work inside here without the battery disconnected. These Suzuki LS650s have a tendency to automatically start to crank, something associated with the decompression relay, so you do not ever want to work inside here if the battery is connected. So my negative cable is off. We're safe. What I want to show you now is how to take a quick look inside here, see how things are, and then remove that clutch. So let's get started. First thing I want to point out is this gasket. This is a genuine Suzuki gasket. You just can't get any better than this. If you're running a composite gasket, ditch it. Get one of these. This gasket here has probably been used 20 times or more, and it's still in perfect condition, doesn't leak. I can just keep using it over and over. If you'll notice, this magnet attracts that gasket. It's a metal gasket, a steel gasket with some sort of a plastic coating, and it's just superb. So like I said, if you're running a composite gasket, ditch it and get one of those genuine Suzuki jobs, just like I just pulled off of there. Once you get this cover open, you want to take a look at your cam chain tensioner. Mine is not a good example because it's not a stock tensioner. It's special, okay? But you want to see, if you have a stock tensioner, you want to see how far this plunger is protruding from the tensioner body. And there's plenty of stuff on the forum, plenty of posts on this forum that discuss this failure-prone cam chain tensioner. Okay, so look up those other posts, study up, and make sure your tensioner is not extended too far. What will happen is this keeps extending, and pretty soon it just falls apart, and all this paraphernalia goes through your primary gears and wrecks everything up, and your valves crash into the piston, and your whole engine is destroyed because this cheesy piece of junk fell apart. So study up on that tensioner and get yours squared away while you're in here. Two other items that you're concerned with is this left hand nut right here on your primary drive gear. You got to be very careful never to get that confused, because what can happen is you think it's a right hand nut and you go trying to break it loose, and it's not coming loose, and next thing you know, you've broken the cam chain sprocket, which is situated behind the primary drive gear. You've overcompressed it and it fractures and you don't know it, and the next thing you know, you get it all back together and you can have big failures as a result of that. You also, while you're in here, before you close it out, you want to check the torque on your balance shaft bolt right here. Okay, I don't know what that value is, you'll have to look it up, but it's somewhere around 35 foot-pounds as I recall, and you don't want to close it up without at least checking the torque on that bolt to make sure that it's tight enough. Okay, the clutch is situated here. Mine's a special clutch. It's got 13 plates. A standard clutch only has 11 plates, but working on the two is pretty much the same deal. You want to get this release plate. You've got a release plate here that bears on the springs, okay, and it has a bearing, a little ball bearing called the release bearing. You want to get that release plate off. I'm going to use a rattle wrench just to make things fast. I don't like using rattle wrenches, but in this particular instance, I'm going to do it so that we can get through the video as quick as possible. Just uniformly loosen all the bolts, little at a time. The heads of these bolts are special. They've been cut down. Standard bolts are a little taller, but that's because my clutch has an extra couple of plates. Okay, so this is the release plate assembly. Okay, whoops, sorry about that. You got a push rod. This push rod comes in 3 different lengths. You use this push rod to adjust the clutch release mechanism. Okay, you want to make sure that this bearing turns freely. Okay, no evidence of binding. You also want to know that that O-ring is in good condition and that it's there. Don't try and run this thing without that O-ring, or you won't have adequate oil pressure to your transmission input shaft or the clutch basket bearing or bushing. The correct nomenclature for the clutch basket is the primary driven gear, according to Suzuki. Now you want to put some washers on here in place of the release plate because you want to cinch down on these springs again. The reason you want to cinch down on the springs is because you're going to need the clutch to hold while you break the clutch nut loose. And it also keeps the clutch pack all together when you remove it from the input shaft. Run this in a ways, and I'm going to hit them with the rattle wrench, but like I said, I really don't like using rattle wrenches on these things. This is really a light duty impact driver, so I'm not too worried about it. But now, if you have a severely slipping clutch, if your clutch slips really, really bad, the spring force may not be sufficient to hold everything from turning, and you may have to resort to placing the transmission in top gear and tightening the rear brake, or holding the rear brake, or tightening the rear brake at the adjuster in the rear. Not sure if you can see that in the video. We'll see if we can aim it to that. This right here. You may have to tighten that up until the wheel can't turn at all and put the transmission in 5th gear to keep the input shaft from turning while you loosen the nut. Let's make sure this camera is focused where we want it. Yeah, I guess that's pretty good. Okay, so we got the clutch locked up with the clutch springs and these small washers. I believe they're 1/4 inch ID by 7/8 OD. And now you want to bend the lock tab washer out of the way. Note this very small ball peen hammer. It's like a 2 ounce or something. I like to use a small chisel and get the tab started with a small chisel. And then once the tab started to bend open, fold open, then I use a flat punch. And I flatten that tab out. Small hammer. All this force, when you're beating on that tab, the force is being driven through the input shaft, and the force is being absorbed by the input shaft ball bearing. You don't want to be beating the heck out of that input shaft ball bearing. So now you can place a socket, a 32mm socket, on that nut and break the nut loose. But one of the problems you're going to have is everything's going to try and turn while you're doing that. Now, I don't think this nut is very tight because I just threw it on temporarily and barely snugged it up, but you take some soft rolled copper tubing, the kind of copper tubing that you would use to install, say for instance, an ice maker. It's very soft and pliable. You can bend it all around. It comes in a roll. That's why they call it rolled copper tubing. It's annealed. It's soft and it won't damage your primary gears. You stick it in the gear mesh right here like that, and then you use the socket to turn the nut. And if the whole deal starts to rotate, this tubing is going to get hooked up in the gear mesh. Since mine is already pretty loose, I can probably break it loose just by banging it like this. But if things were rotating, the copper tubing would be stuck in the mesh and keep it from turning. There, okay? Like I said, this nut was already loose. If your nut is good and tight, it's definitely going to draw that soft rolled copper tubing into the mesh. Now you can take the nut off and the lock tab washer, okay, and the whole clutch pack, that's the pressure disc and hub and all of the plates, the steel and fiber plates, just pulls right out. Note this washer, this thrust washer, it's 40 millimeters in diameter. Don't get it confused with the thrust washer that's behind this basket, which is 44 millimeters in diameter. Now you can take this to the workbench and disassemble the clutch plates, okay, check everything out, and get it ready to reinstall. 40 millimeters here, not the 44 millimeter. See how it fits so nicely in that recess? If you get that mixed up with the one behind it, this one right here, you can cause the clutch to drag. It doesn't work correctly. Notice how the larger diameter washer fits tightly in that recess. You don't want that. Okay? So that's all there is to pulling the clutch apart once you have the clutch cover off. Hopefully that helps.